Hello, good day. Today this looks strange. What is this? What is this? It just looks different, that's all. Okay, so yes, today is Monday, March the 29th. We're at the end of March and we're cruising through this unit on the later Middle Ages. I hope we enjoyed the YouTube up above, the medieval world in 3 minutes. I found 3 minutes. I found it fascinating. But let's talk about our study guide. Yes. As it says there, feudalism, the old Dark Ages, began to wane in strength as the Middle Ages wore on. The struggle for power between the Roman Catholic Church and the secular authorities sometimes left the church and became physical and very deadly. The Roman Catholic Church depended upon the faith of individuals and excommunication and the interdict as a way of controlling wayward rulers and their flocks. Say, what does that mean? Excommunication, you have to remember this is the age of faith. I mean, how else could the church say, hey, let's all go on a crusade and another and another and another without people believing what the church said? Um, and so the strength behind the Roman Catholic Church's power was the fact that everyone believed that if you offend the Roman Catholic Church, then you are not going to go to heaven. You will not pass go. You'll not collect $200, and you'll go straight to hell. And so their biggest weapon was something called excommunication, meaning that I'm going to pause this. So, yes, back to the matter at hand. Where were we? So, the church's primary weapon was this thing called excommunication. You say, what's that? It means basically what it says it means. It means the church cuts you off. So you say, well, so what? It means that you're not allowed to participate in communion. You're not allowed to receive any of the seven sacraments, confession. Your marriage won't be blessed, and like I said, communion, which is you're supposed to. It's a way of recreating yourself with God and performing the Last Supper all over again. But also, it means that you would be denied last rites, meaning that if you were dying, the church could not give you um, peace, could not cleanse you before God before you died, and so that was a big, big thing. You know, excommunication was a one-way ticket to hell, and the church used that. Now, sometimes though, the church could excommunicate a king, and the king would like blow it off. But what the church would do then would be something called the interdict. Now, what was the interdict? The interdict was where the church would simply tell the priest in this particular parish, lock the doors, shut down the church, lock the front door of the church, and do not have church services. Deny the blessings of the church, the church services, the seven sacraments to the people of the kingdom, meaning that the entire kingdom was basically excommunicated. And therefore, if something happened to them, they would be denied the opportunity to go to heaven. And once again, they would go to hell. They would not pass go, not collect $200. One of the most famous incidents of these struggles was between King Henry II and the Archbishop of Canterbury, recognized as the top Roman Catholic Church official in England. And what happened there was that the Archbishop of Canterbury had been a regular opponent to King Henry II, and King Henry II had him murdered while he was praying. That the Archbishop's name was Thomas a Becket, and there's a famous woodcutting of that incident. Yeah, the king sent his soldiers, and while the Archbishop was praying, they hacked him to pieces. Ah, yes, Great Schism. The Great Schism was one of those things that drove a wedge between the Roman Catholic Church and the people, just like the film said the Black Plague did, just like the Crusades, which all ended up in total failure. The Great Schism was when there was not one pope but two. You see at the election of the new pope. When a pope dies, they elect a new one, uh, and that election is carried out by an organization called the College of Cardinals. Cardinals being the second-ranking uh, offices in the Roman Catholic Church. And at this collection, at this voting of the College of Cardinals, the Italian cardinals voted for an Italian pope, and the French cardinals voted for a French pope. So there were two popes. And you say, well, okay, what was the big deal about that? Well, it really undermined the credibility of the church. It basically showed that the Roman Catholic Church was no different than any other power-hungry organization at the time. Roman IV, as feudalism faded and towns began to dot the landscape, as feudalism faded, towns and cities began to dot the landscape of Europe. People began returning back to towns like they had in the great days of the Roman Empire. However, unlike the great cities of Rome, European cities were unplanned, crowded, dirty, and quite dangerous places. You say, what do you mean unplanned? Well, it means that the city streets were designed, laid out. It looked like somebody who was intoxicated had designed the city streets. To be honest, if you go to cities like the old sections of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Boston, many of the seaside cities in this country, you'll see in the old section of town, you'll see the same thing. Cities laid out in, oh, geez, I hate that. Cities laid out in stupid. Cities laid out in a haphazard pattern. The city streets running in several different directions. It's very difficult to find your way about, and just like, I'm going to kill that light. What? Forgive me. And I'm back, and I'm sorry. Stupid light. But anyway, yeah. And that's what the cities of Europe were like. Their streets were very narrow. In fact, if you go today to some of the old town parts of Europe, you can still find the same thing. City streets that are about as wide as the hallway out there. And that made them dangerous, easily clogged, and dirty, of course, because remember, they used animals. They walked their animals up and down the city streets, and animals are not polite about where they take a what. Neither were human beings, for that matter. However, in cities and towns, there was an opportunity to be had for the average runaway serf or peasant. What does the Latin word burg mean? The word burg is quite simple. It means city, as in Pittsburgh. You see? Yeah. Or Gettysburg, or Vicksburg. Although it means city, it means somebody's city. Pittsburgh actually was named after Sir William Pitt, the famous English prime minister. As far as Gettysburg and Vicksburg, I couldn't tell you. Burgher is a person who lives in a city. The word urban means of the city. And finally, suburban, it means around the city, as in suburb, yes. The center of town city life was the fair or the festival, which even today is recalled in our county state fairs, local festivals, pig roast, corn roast, and you better believe it, of course, the German Oktoberfest. Yeah, that's a throwback. That's a tradition that was born in the Middle Ages. Oktoberfest, yeah. One of the unique elements, though, of the medieval Renaissance culture was the public building programs that sprang up during this time. Many towns and cities would, at their own or taxpayer expense, build these very large and costly buildings, cathedrals, most of which were the centers of worship, as a way to attract merchants, but also a way to build civic pride in their town or city. What they would do, the idea was the bigger church you could build, and you would then attract relics, relics. A relic is a piece of a saint. For example, like I said, the head of John the Baptist, the tooth of the Apostle Paul, the blood of Christ, things of that nature were considered relics. And once you had those, Christians would make pilgrimages to pray next to these relics, believing that the relics would have some kind of healing power. I mean, the first kind of tourism in the Western world was religious tourism. Yeah. And it was a thriving business. The new building style was most pronounced, was found in large Catholic churches called cathedrals. Cathedral comes from the word cathedra, which means the home of the bishop. Yes, a cathedral is a home of the bishop. For example, the cathedral down in Covington is next to it is a home, and it's the home for the bishop. I don't know how much he lives there, to be honest. This was called the Gothic style of architecture. Gothic style, very ornate, religious sculptures and stained glass windows covered the outside of the sculpture. Tall pointed spires, rooftops made of copper or lead. Yes, lead was a common material. Large stained glass windows. What was that? Yes, large stained glass windows. Lots of user-friendly space in the interior. Then you get into things like gargoyles, which are those monster-looking things that serve two purposes. Gargoyles serve two purposes. One, they were designed to be downspouts. You know, they made the gargoyles big and long and projected away from the side of the building so that, and the rain was diverted into the gargoyle, came out of its mouth and pushed the rainwater away from the foundation of the building so that it wouldn't undermine the foundation. And also, gargoyles were to be reminders that just outside the church itself, was the demons of hell, and that's why they're always frightening looking. Flying buttresses. Once again, we'll look at some flying buttresses here in a minute. And the big thing about Gothic cathedrals was they had huge windows. Windows, once again, cannot be expected to support the weight of a building, and so therefore they found ways to get around that. But they had huge windows. Huge windows meant light. Light meant that lots of people could see. Light meant that you didn't have to burn torches, candles, etc., because torches and candles were expensive, dirty, and over time dangerous because of fire, just like in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The roof caught fire. Yes, it was caused by an electrical spark, but the timbers that held up the roof of Notre Dame were just soaked in carbon from 500 years of burning lamps and lighting candles. Three architectural elements are common in most Gothic constructions: the pointed arch. The arch looked like this, the ribbed vault, and the flying buttresses. I'm going to show you all of those things right here. So let's go, shall we? Take a look at some pictures. Now this, by the way, is an early church. I took this picture in 2013 when Wes and I went to England. Now this is not a Gothic church, and you can see easily why. Windows are very small. The windows are very small. Worked that time. But I did want you to see this because one of the things that churches always had in common, no matter where the churches were, they went to great expense to make them the most beautiful structure in the area, and two, they used the material that they had handy. And this one used the red stone that they cut into blocks to make it. And this church may look small from the outside. It even looks smaller from the inside, but it's a nice church. I liked it. This is the Killy Cathedral, which was originally a Catholic church. It was built in the 11th century. Notice it does have the stained glass window, or the big windows, but it does not have width. And so you don't see, you will excuse me, please. So Mr. Horton, how may I help you? What about him? Sorry, let me get back to what I was doing. And so, yes. Now, yes, this is the exterior of that church. Once again, though, notice what they built it out of. They built it out of the stone that was available. Yeah. That's the outside. This is the interior of that church. Notice they do have the rib vaulting. Notice the pointed arches here. Okay. But notice once again, not a lot of user space in here. This, by the way, is the nave of the church. The nave is the prime seating area. Called nave because that's who sat there or stood there. And this area around here, the ambulatory, where you could walk around. Okay. This, going from the ridiculous to the sublime, is Westminster Cathedral. We didn't have time to go in there, although we had a ticket. We could have went in. We had a London pass. But this is probably the most famous church in in England. And it is a Gothic cathedral. Notice the large stained glass windows. Notice the flying buttresses. Yes, definite Gothic. This one, next. Now, this one I took in Poland. This is the St. Paul Cathedral in Poznan, Poland. Notice the spires, two tall spires. No flying buttresses, though. And once again, notice the different building material. In Poznan, they used red brick, which they had available. In fact, in most of Poland, they used the red brick. This is the interior of the Poznan Cathedral. Okay. Same brick, rather plain, but still the bigger windows. Now this one, I took this picture in Prague, in the Czech Republic. This is St. Barnabas Cathedral that sits on top of the Capitol Hill in Prague, in the Czech Republic. Now these are flying buttresses. Notice how they extend down from the roof. You have a big tall roof with the spires here, and then the weight of the roof is directed into these flying buttresses and directed down into these spires. The spires are made extra tall, not for decorative purposes, although that does happen. I mean, that it is decorative looking, but the weight of these spires makes a more solid buttress to hold up the wing and therefore to hold up the roof. Okay. Pushing on. This is the interior of that same cathedral. Now, see, this is Gothic Cathedral. This is the ribbed, vaulted, these are ribs, and this is the vaulted ceiling. You see? And push on, and yes, this is Yorkminster Cathedral. A beautiful, beautiful cathedral. It's one of those things that it was so big that to get it all into the picture, we had to get far away from it, but it's definitely Gothic. I mean, you see the large stained glass windows here, or the large glass windows, and, you know, the two towers, twin spires. But yeah, this is the interior of that same cathedral. It cost £12, I think, to get in there, equivalent like $18, I think. And this last picture is a better picture of the interior. See, now you get some sense of how big the thing was, how tall it was. It's the tallest Gothic cathedral in England. And of course, being painted white, the light reflects nicely off that. There's very little electric lighting here. It's all sun lighting. Okay. And so that ends our lecture today. And we will continue. Actually, tomorrow we will start scripting a film on how these cathedrals got built. So yes, have a good day.